Hi, class. Welcome to week two. So, I just want to kind of go over some of the readings about early stories. And so, we have myths, fairy tales, fables, parables. All of those are great, whatever you want to kind of focus on. I really enjoy fairy tales, and there's a book, and it's also an essay if you don't want to read the whole book. I would actually probably just recommend the essay. It's called Uses of Enchantment by Bruno Bettelheim. I will link to it in case you're interested. Basically, his sort of whole approach here is kind of analyzing fairy tales through a Freudian lens. And so for Bettelheim, his whole sort of deal is looking at what fairy tales allow children to do. And so that sounds kind of vague, but this idea of uses of enchantment is like for Bettelheim is like, oh, that the reason why fairy tales are important is that they allow children to kind of work out certain issues, whether that's jealousy or, of course, since he's a Freudian, the Oedipus complex, right? And so that for him, fairy tales kind of represent this space where kids can kind of work out their issues and kind of, you know, kind of work on this transition to adulthood, because as we all know that being a child and adolescence is really really difficult, and kind of working through this stuff is insanely hard sometimes. And so that for Bettelheim, that fairy tales in particular allow children to do this. Now, I think you could take his approach on fairy tales and apply it to fables, parables, and myths too, because I think that these things also allow us to do, you know, the same sort of thing even into adulthood. And so that would be kind of my thesis, is taking extending Bettelheim's argument to not just fairy tales but all of these types of stories. So for example, myths. So if you think of like the myth of Sisyphus. So Sisyphus is cursed to roll the boulder constantly up the hill, right? For all eternity. And so as adults, I think we can kind of feel for Sisyphus, because we all have a rock. And Camus, in his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, talks about how we all have to kind of find our own rock in a way, and kind of like keep pushing that boulder up the hill, even though it might seem fruitless or pointless. Now I know that sounds, entirely depressing, but in a way, it's about making meaning out of the meaningless, right? And I think as adults, that's something that we kind of have to grapple with sometimes, as things seem meaningless and that pointless. And how do we define meaning out of it? And so if we look at, a character like Sisyphus, who is cursed to roll this boulder up a hill for no, really purpose other than to just punish him, you know, Camus' argument, or just kind of the argument in general, the way of looking at it is if he finds a purpose in doing this, then he's not only kind of gaining power in creating this purpose, but also it gives him a sense of, maybe passion in a way for doing it, because he gets to create the purpose behind what he is doing. So when I think we're looking at all these, of course, fairy tales allow children to kind of work out some of these issues, but I think things like myths, allow even adults to kind of deal with these sort of issues that we're dealing with as adults as well. And so that I think if you kind of look at the modern sort of landscape of popular culture, one of the most endearing, or not endearing, but maybe most just prevalent sort of myths is the superhero, right? Like, and so we have these superheroes who are kind of taking the place of these myths, and they too allow us to kind of work through some of these issues. And that's why I think someone like the Hulk is so sort of relevant to kids a lot of times, where they can sort of like really feel companionship or kinship with someone like the Hulk, and be like, yeah, sometimes I get really angry and, want to break stuff. And so that it also kind of functions and performs this ability to work out these issues. And so I think that it's a, kind of an interesting way to kind of look at these. And that's the lens I'm kind of going to be talking about myths, fairy tales, fables, and parables. That way we can sort of kind of see it for like, well, what use does it have in our culture, and what do we use it for now, perhaps, like, and what are the differences and similarities there. So I'll link to that essay, and of course that's not required, but if you're interested, I'll put it up there and we can talk more about it. Other than that, we're going to just get to the discussion board and try to see how these things kind of connect to that. All right, talk to you soon.